Decided was that I actually talked about bodies the last time we were together. And so this time I would share something from the one piece of what I would consider public theology that I did this year, which was an article co-written with retired General Robert Latif from the US Army on lethal autonomous weapons. And I use in my book, Lethal Autonomous Weapons, as a case study of the question of agency. In other words, how much agency do we want computers to have? And in the light of technology and presence, the question really boils down to whose presence? In other words, should AI simply be an augmentation of our own human presence? In which case it's a tool. Should it represent our presence in places where we are not, such as the Mars rover, in which case it's our surrogate? Or do we really want AI to have its own presence and therefore its own agency? This is a question that goes right back to the beginning of AI. We've got two Stanford guys here. The first is John McCarthy, who actually coined the term artificial intelligence. And he describes the goal of artificial intelligence as to come up with a computer that has a mind that thinks like a human mind. Then just down the hall in a different lab is Douglas Engelbart, who you might know of as the guy who invented this, the computer mouse. And he said that what we really should be looking for is not AI, but IA, in other words, intelligent augmentation. And that the tools we should be looking at are not self-standing. They should simply be tools like all other tools that amplify some type of human agency. So we think about, the rest of our tools, they're mostly amplifiers. The microscope amplifies the power of our eyes. And in general, we think of the tool itself as having no intrinsic agency. And here I've got the picture of the gun because I'm sure you're all really familiar with the old NRA slogan, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And yet, as many proponents of gun control say, well, it's people with guns who kill people. So if we look at this question of agency, does our technology, while it may not have intrinsic agency, have some sort of secondary agency? Jacques Ellul believes this is true, and he writes, technology is a power endowed with its own peculiar force. It refracts in its own specific sense the wills which make use of it and the ends proposed to it. Neil Postman goes further and says, we've engaged in a deification of technology, which means that the culture seeks its authorization in technology, finds its satisfactions in technology, takes its orders from technology. New technologies alter the structure of our interests, the things we think about. They alter the character of our symbols, the things we think with, and they alter the nature of community, the arena in which thoughts develop. So here we have two people who are saying, there does seem to be a sort of agency because the technology changes us and therefore it changes what we do. Many would argue that true agency involves choice and that choice must come from inside. So most people would say, well, something that is programmed doesn't have a choice. It must do what the programmer told it to do. On the other hand, the philosopher Daniel Dennett says, well, there's no reason why we couldn't think that our choices arise out of our mental states and that the interior states of a computer's CPU are analogous to mental states. Therefore, choice arises out of that. John Searle, however, would argue against Dennett, and if you think of his famous Chinese room problem, in which he says, look, if you pass Chinese characters into a room where somebody's got a wonderful encyclopedia They look up an answer and they pass it out, but they don't know what the Chinese actually means. They have interior states, but they have no knowledge of those interior states themselves. This fits an argument made by the ethicists Michael and Susan Anderson, who would say for a computer to be a moral agent, it must be not under direct control, it must interact with the environment in a deliberate way, fulfill a social role, and be cognizant of the responsibility inherent in that role. And here they would say, well, now we're siding with Searle in number 4 by saying the computer might do the first 3. It might make choices not under direct control. It might interact with its environment in a deliberate way and fulfill some social role, but it is not as of yet cognizant of what it is doing, of its responsibility to fulfill that role. Now, if we look at lethal autonomous weapons and ask the question, are these intelligent augmentation or artificial intelligence? We have first to look at 2 scenarios. The one is the use of artificial intelligence programs in command and control. So these are making strategic decisions about what to do, and usually we would say this is intelligent augmentation. But then you have the autonomous weapons on the battlefield itself where they're making tactical decisions under no direct control. And here you say, well, now do we have something that really is making its own choices and exerting its own agency? Now, we tend to think of these lethal autonomous weapons that are making tactical choices on the battlefield in large terms. So here we have autonomous Kalashnikov tanks. Below that, we have these sort of blown up Boston Dynamic dog type things that are used to carry munitions, but that can also be fitted with the capability to fire. Actually, as it turns out, what most lethal autonomous weapons are more likely to look like are these, which are cargo 2 drones. And here Marine Colonel James Jenkins has said, we want lethal autonomous weapon systems to be small, smart, cheap, and abundant, rather than exquisite and expensive. So the militaries around the world are much more interested in these small, smart, cheap, and abundant lethal autonomous weapons. There are a lot of benefits to these weapons. They can process vast amounts of data really quickly, far beyond our capabilities. They can make rapid decisions on a battlefield. They can operate in harsh environments. They're less expensive than troops. They carry out orders with fewer mistakes, and they big one, they keep soldiers out of physically and psychologically dangerous or deadly environments. If we look at this list, we can see that the top 2 are more for strategic decision making, the bottom 4 more for tactical decision making. The top 2 for the generals, the bottom 4 on the battlefield with or instead of human soldiers. The question now is, should humans be in the loop, which means they're helping make these decisions, on the loop, which means they can at least override the decision, or out of the loop completely? And to General Robert Latif, he says, answering this question is our moral Rubicon for the 21st century, because the advent of flight took soldiers physically off the battlefield. The advent of nuclear weapons, of course, gave us a doomsday weapon, which I'll return to later. And both of these have made theologians rethink just war theory. And Latif believes, and I do as well, that we need to rethink just war theory again in the light of our new weapons. I'm not going to go through all the parts of just war theory. It's traditionally divided into jus ad bellum, which is when to go to war. The two I want to point to here are legitimate authority and last resort. And one question that is raised is, can a computer be a legitimate authority if it is making strategic command decisions? Then jus in bello is justice in the carrying out of warfare. And here I want to point to discrimination and avoidance of uncontrollable suffering. Okay, when it comes to discrimination, Professor Ron Arkin from Georgia Tech has said that he thinks autonomous weapons are a good idea because they would never lash out against the enemy out of emotion, out of anger, out of rage, out of a need for revenge. In other words, they will just do what they are told, so they might be less likely to commit war crimes. On the other hand, Major General Robert Lateef believes that in terms of discrimination and proportionality, these weapons give us a problem because if they are small, smart, abundant, and cheap, we're likely to launch them without thinking that much about whether a counterattack is proportional, say, to an initial attack. Just, launch the swarms. Do these laws have agency? If we come back to Ellul, I want us to think about the own peculiar force of these weapons that have their own, they refract our own will. And so T.K. Adams has said in the U.S. Army War Quarterly, how much control will we really have if decisions in the field are made at speeds that we are unable to follow? At what point might we be forced to cede decisions to the machines? As AI moves from tactical to strategic decisions, what does mission command mean? In other words, will these machines go too fast for us to remain in or on the loop and leave us basically out of the loop? And this brings us then to the other part of jus in bello. Are lethal autonomous weapons intrinsically evil, such as chemical or biological weapons, because of their disproportionality and the fact that they might take us out of the loop? Obviously, many people are speaking up about the idea that these should be banned, and there was a letter about a year ago from 272 prominent scientists suggesting banning. I'm not going to go into that, but if we return to the question of presence, if these weapons augment our presence, or if AI in general augments our presence, it's a tool. It's the kind of tools we have today. If it becomes a surrogate for our presence, then I think we run into the question of Mickey's broom, which we'll talk about in a second. And if they act as a presence on their own, this of course brings up the question that many scientists such as Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking have said we ought to fear, which is the singularity, when the AI becomes, in a sense, smarter or more powerful than we are. I do not believe the singularity is something that we need to fear. I don't actually think this is going to happen. I'm more afraid of Mickey's broom. And what I mean by that is in the movie Fantasia, and if you haven't seen it, please do, because 2 episodes of it are all about technology. But the one I'm thinking of is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, where Mickey casts a spell on the broom to carry water for him. And the broom just mindlessly does what it is told and ultimately totally swamps the workshop because Mickey doesn't know how to stop it. And this is what I fear with lethal autonomous weapons, that they will move at speeds and that they will mindlessly do what they are told and be very difficult to stop. And so to end, I want to mention Fermi's paradox. At a famous lunch in Los Alamos, we were talking about why haven't we been contacted, or why haven't we found at least the machinery of a technically advanced society? And Fermi asked the question, yeah, where is everybody? Um, an equation called Drake's equation figures out what is the likelihood that a technologically advanced society would be in close enough proximity to us to contact us. And in the interest of time, I won't go into all these variables. But the crucial variable is the clock at the end. And that is, how long do technologically advanced civilizations last? And where is the technological bottleneck? The question really is, we evolve, but we evolve slowly. And I believe with Ilya, see, I'm going to agree with Ilya today, that we are evolving in terms of Teilhard's view of us evolving toward authentic relationship, towards presence and towards love. But are we evolving fast enough? Or is our technology and its power evolving faster than we are? And that, I think, is the crucial question in Drake's equation. Is there a technological bottleneck, in a sense, where the technology evolves faster than our ability to love one another, to care for one another, and to use that technology mindfully? I'm leaving that as an open question. I think it is an open question for us at this point. I think Ilya is a lot more optimistic than I am, which may be a part of her Catholic background versus my Protestant background. But finally, I will return, and I do in my book, which is structured around Karl Barth's 4 criteria of authentic relationship, where Barth says, for any relationship to have true presence, we must look the other in the eye, speak to and hear the other, aid the other, and do it gladly. Now think of these 4 things in terms of autonomous weapons. Can the weapon truly look the other in the eye? Or has our warfare gotten away from us because we do not look our enemy in the eye? Okay, and then let's look at the bottom one, emotion. Ron Arkin says, not having emotion is a good thing. But is it? Or is it the fact that our artificial intelligence precisely cannot feel an emotion that will make us an implacable enemy? And I'm going to end with that.